Hiya, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. Now I am going to show you 3 different ways that you can take a print from a stencil. So kind of not using it like a traditional stencil and inking around it and through it and over top of it. We're going to do a few other different ways, and we want to take a print of these really fine, delicate lines that this stencil has. Now this one in particular is very delicate. It is very intricate and those lines are very thin. So we're obviously going to get a really delicate look out of this. And the looks will vary depending on the method that you choose, but I thought I would quickly run you through the 3 different methods that I mainly use if I'm wanting to take a print of it rather than kind of inking over top and getting the pattern that way. Now this is my stock standard colors that I use for the rainbow every single time when I'm using my Distress Oxide inks. So if you want to take note of them, take a little screenshot, but every single time this is what I use. So I'm starting off with some Candied Apple and I am blending this onto some watercolor paper, some Tim Holtz watercolor paper. Now if you are trying to get a really nice blend, or if you are someone who struggles with getting a good blend, then using this watercolor paper is almost cheating because of the light coating that it has on top of the paper. It makes it really good for blending and getting a smooth blend in particular. I am going through this really quickly because this video is not about kind of how I create my backgrounds and things, but I thought I would just whiz through this bit really quickly to show you just how I go about it. I need to go back and forward. For example, I'll do the blue and then I'll pick up the green again and then I'll go back to the blue and then I'll start the purple. It's kind of a back and forward thing with ink blending to make sure that you get a really soft blend in between the two. But I do want this to be a really cheery card and quite a bright card. So that's why I have chosen a very classic rainbow striped background. Of course, you can do anything. The other backgrounds that I love to create on this little non-stick mat here are where I use, at the minute, I'm going to use the Candied Apple, the Spiced Marmalade, and the Mustard Seed. So basically a red, an orange, and a yellow. I add a little bit of water down onto my non-stick mat once I have smushed those inks down. And then I'm just going to pick up those inks on my watercolor paper again. And then once I've kind of shifted them around or moved them around or re-dipped it a couple of times, then I'm going to partially, kind of about 70-80% dry this off, and then I'm going to re-dip it in again to get some more layers. In particular, the Distress Oxide inks are good for layering. Some of the other dye inks, even the normal Distress inks and Simon Hurley inks, the Catherine Paula inks, all those ones are not as good at layering. They are straight dye inks, but these ones, because they are a little bit of a hybrid, they tend to layer up really nicely. So that's what I'm going to do, and I kind of just fiddle around and keep dipping it in and moving it around, drying it until I get kind of what I'm looking for. And I was looking for sort of a darker-ish background here because of the prints that I'm going to be doing on top, so I wanted it to be rather bold. Now, the first way that we're going to do it is using a gel plate. This one happens to be the Dilutions. This is a 9x11 gel plate. There are so many different sizes and so many different options out there. These days, there is the Jelly Plate brand, and those are really good. This one is just as good, and some work better than others for certain techniques, but a generic technique like this is going to be just fine on pretty much any that you have. So I'm going to use some black paint. This happens to be the heavy bodied acrylic paint, but honestly any black is going to work just fine, and mine is at the very end. I just have the last little bit that I'm going to eke out of this one, and I'm using a brayer to just roll it on a little bit of this. Now I'm not going to roll it on the entire front. This is a huge gel plate and I don't need to use up all of it at all. I'm going to pop my little stencil straight down onto that black paint. Then this bit here, sorry about the fuzziness, the camera does not like it when everything's kind of plain white, and I'm just going to rub really carefully because this is a delicate stencil. It's very intricate. The lines are very fine, so I'm going to kind of rub with my finger and then I get one print, and this is really to take away all of the excess. But how gorgeous is that print by itself? So I will be keeping that. Then I'm going to peel off the stencil, and this is where I can take a print with that black paint. Now I'm going to pop down my card front on there and then a scrap piece of paper, and then I'm going to give it a really good rub, making sure to get my fingers kind of press them right in there to get all of that fine detail of that design. And then once I think I've got a really good impression, or as good as I'm going to get, I lift up the scrap piece and then I can lift up my card front, and then this is what I am left left with. Now remember, this is not a bold stencil, so you are going to get different looks depending on the stencil that you use for this one. Now, kind of going off topic because I'm not going to use the same stencil, but I just want to show you in comparison this one here, which has much thicker, bolder lines in between, even though it's still a kind of pattern there. I'm going to do the same thing just to show you that I am going to use a scrap piece to take away all of that excess paint that we don't want at the minute. And again, beautiful design that I pull from that. But I have the background that we created earlier. I'm going to peel off the stencil, pop this one down. I'm going to pop it off to the side a little bit just so that the black print is not lined up directly. I like it a little bit off to the side, and then do the same thing where I pop down a scrap piece of paper and then give it a really good rub to make sure that I'm getting really even pressure all over, and I want the paint to transfer onto my card front there, so just give it a really nice rub down. And then once I have taken off the scrap piece, then you will see that these black lines are much bolder and much more defined and kind of bright, but still a really good print, and this one is really gorgeous. I'm going to keep this as well. So anyway, moving on to the second technique that you are able to use to get a print of the stencil rather than inking through it. Now this one I'm going to use some VersaMark ink. This is a sticky embossing ink, and I'm going to pop it all over the front of my stencil without getting it on my card front piece there. Now, a really good quality sticky embossing ink pad is worth the investment, in my opinion. I tried a lot of brands and I just ended up coming back to this one because it does make a difference. Otherwise, embossing can become really frustrating, especially if your ink pad is a little bit dry as well. So I definitely recommend getting the re-inker with this one. It's going to make life easier. Then I have popped a little bit of low-tack tape out the side there, and that just gives me something to grip onto. It gives the stencil something to grip onto, and I have put it inked side down onto the paper. Then I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine just like I would if I had a die there, although I don't. So it's not going to give a huge amount of pressure, but it's going to give enough pressure that it transfers all of that VersaMark ink onto our card front, which is what we want. Now, just because this is what I was going for, I'm going to use some white embossing powder here, but you could use gold embossing powder, you could use bronze or copper embossing powders. All of those things would look absolutely stunning. Now, I know that you're probably saying, okay, well, if I put the stencil down, then wouldn't I be able to just ink over top of it and get this exact same look? Well, I mean, you would if you were doing it in white like I am, but if you were to use any other color here, for example, gold embossing powders, then you can't do that, because once you emboss, you aren't able to stick ink over top of it because the ink will just wipe off. It is not a porous surface for your ink blending to sink into. So yeah, just this is one fun way to do it, and I just chose to do white because I love that bright white look, and it also gives a really shiny, gorgeous sheen from the embossing powder. So there, so far we have two ways that we have created a print from here. And in fact, with the embossing powder trick, I actually have an entire video on how to do that and lots of different ways that you can use it. So if I remember, I will pop a link to that down below too. Then the last way is just to ink up your stencil. So I have this on a scrap piece of paper. I'm using some VersaFine Onyx black ink, which is a pigment ink, and it's going to stay wet just a little bit longer than a dye ink would. Then I'm going to gently pop this down, and I don't want to shift it once I've popped it down. Then I'm going to put a scrap piece of paper over top and just give it really good pressure to make sure that I am getting all of those little really fine intricate lines, and because there's not a whole lot of ink there to transfer, so to get a really nice even transfer, I'm just going to pop my brayer over top. Now I am doing this in black ink just so that you can kind of get a good comparison with the first option that we used, but of course you could use any pigment inks. The VersaFine clear pigment inks are my absolute favorite, and you can see it has given a nice impression there, a little bit lighter perhaps than the paint one that we used as well. But there are three different options for getting prints from your stencil. Now here is a really good card making tip in my opinion. So I am going to use some Stick It double-sided adhesive and apply a strip of this to a piece of vellum. Now sometimes when you use vellum, your sentiment just doesn't stand out enough for what you were hoping. Now, I only use one type of vellum. I am very sold on it, and I love any product that I don't have to have multiple of. I don't really want a heavyweight vellum and a lightweight vellum and a this, that vellum. I just really like the Lawn Fawn vellum. It's my favorite. It embosses. I can do heat embossing. I can do dry embossing. I can do everything with it. But, and it is quite a thick vellum. So it is £36, which is actually quite heavyweight. There is definitely much, much lighter. But sometimes you just need the vellum to be a little less transparent. And so I am going to add 2 sheets together, and I use the Stick It double-sided adhesive because it's really nice and thin. And that way I have vellum that is just a little bit more opaque for what I need, but I can still see through it. It still looks like vellum, and I can still kind of see my background that I have created. Because usually when I'm using vellum for something, it means I don't want to cover up quite as much of what I've created. Now I have this cling stamp here. This cling stamp is called Cheery Day, and I actually just love this little message. So it says, just a little message coming your way to wish you a bright and cheery day. And I just really like that. I think it can be used for a whole lot of occasions, and I like it when cards can be versatile. So I just wanted to quickly show you here what this looks like on the 2 different kinds of vellum that I've got, or that I've created when I pop it against my background. So I'm going to do 1 of each, one that is just 1 single piece of vellum, and then one that is 2 stuck together. Now I recommend using something like double-sided adhesive sheets in between, because that way you won't be able to see any adhesive spots. So it's not going to work as well if you use like double-sided tape. My advice would be to use these sheets. Now here is with the single layer, and the message is a little bit muddly behind there, whereas I feel like with the double layer here, I can read this one a whole lot better. So it just depends on your preference, and it depends what you are looking for. But in my opinion, I think that if you just need a little bit more coverage, then doubling up that layer of vellum is going to do the trick. So here it is on this other rainbow background with the black, and then with the other one beside it, you can kind of see that this one blocks out the background just that tiny little bit more. And of course you can do that with any shape. It doesn't just have to be a strip going down the middle. It could be circles, it could be anything. I would just put my vellum together, my 2 sheets of vellum together, and then I would die cut out a circle or whatever shape that you need, or a heart, anything. And that way often you can hide adhesive a little bit better if you need to hide adhesive. So yeah, just another little trick to remember if you need it. Now I will have all of the supplies that I have used in the video today listed down below. If you were inspired by these cards and you have created your own versions, then I would love to see them, and the easiest way to do that is over on our Facebook page, which I will leave a link to that also. But it is called Come Crafting with Natasha on Facebook, and you can either search for it or click the link. And I also have a few more bits and pieces down there, like my mailing address. I absolutely love it when I get mail in my P.O Box. It really, really makes my week. There is nothing better than receiving cards and things in the mail. I so appreciate that. If you are looking for ways to help me out, I do use the Buy Me a Coffee function. There is a link to that down below if you feel like that is something you are interested in, and that helps me a whole lot for making videos on my channel. But other than that, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that I will see you in the next one. Thanks, bye!